Today I want to talk about squaring up subunits that go into a quilt block. First I'm going to show you some of the tools that are available on the market for doing that. One of them is this OmniGrip squaring ruler, which is 6.5 inches square. One of the things to keep in mind when you're working with these rulers is to know just where your measurements are. This one is marked off in 1-inch increments with individual little lines for in between, but there's an extra ½ inch on two sides so that you could square a block, a small block or subunit to 6.5 inches. Make sure you're using the right side when you are using this as a square up tool, and that you're not including this extra ½ inch if you're trying to square up something that's smaller than 6.5 inches squared. Another item that has been on the market is this bias square. Again, this one is marked off in inches on two sides with lines that come to a diagonal in the middle. This is very helpful, this particular one, for squaring up half square triangles and quarter square triangles. The OmniGrip also has a diagonal line that is very good for squaring up half square triangles and quarter square triangles. And another one that's on the market is one that's called Creative Grids. Again, this one, like the OmniGrip, has an additional ½ inch around two sides. So make sure you use the correct sides, which would be the ones without the extra ½ inch. And the diagonal line as well. This one has that one. Today we're going to square up three different types of subunits. One is a 4-patch, then a half square triangle subunit, and a quarter square triangle subunit. With the 4-patch, I have oversized it just a little bit. We're going to square it to 4 inches by 4 inches. Using the OmniGrip ruler, I'm going to be using my horizontal and vertical markings on my ruler. Because I want it squared to 4 inches, I'm going to lay my 2-inch by 2-inch crossing line in the very center of my 4-patch so that I don't take off too much from one of the sides. My 2-inch line is going to be along the seam line in this direction, and my other 2-inch line is going to be along the seam line in this direction. Once I have those lined up perfectly, I'm going to trim it on these two sides right here. I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees or 180 degrees. Place my ruler back on it again, lining up my 2-inch line along the horizontal seam and my other 2-inch line along the vertical seam. And trim the other two sides. There we have beautifully trimmed and squared 4-patch. The next one that we're going to square up is a half square triangle. Because both of these are, assuming that these both might go into a quilt square, I'm going to square these both up to the same size. The half square triangle one is quite oversized. The one that is a quarter square triangle is more nearly the right size. These are going to be squared to 3 inches. This time, again, I'm going to use my OmniGrip. I'll show you how I would lay it out with that, as well as with the bias square ruler. I'm concerned here about maintaining a nice diagonal here, so I use the diagonal line that is on my ruler. I'm going to place the diagonal line along the diagonal line on my patch. I previously have put a piece of tape at the corner of 3 inches. So this would mark out 3 inches by 3 inches here. So it gives me something to ballpark in there to know where that corner would be, because this corner I can see, the other one kind of gives me an indication there. I have quite a bit of leeway in trimming this one off because it's quite a bit oversized. Once I know that my diagonal is on my diagonal seam very nicely here, I will take off 2 of the sides. I'm going to rotate it around so that my cut edge is now facing me. Put my ruler back on. This time I'm going to utilize the spot that I've marked here where my 3-inch intersection is. I'm going to place that 3-inch intersection right on the point, on the corner of my patch, making sure that my 3-inch line is along the cut edge here and the 3-inch line is along this cut edge, and my diagonal is lined up perfectly. I'll trim the other 2 sides off. And there we have a nicely squared half square triangle subunit. Our last one is quarter square triangle subunit. Again, we're going to utilize the diagonal on our ruler. This time I'm going to move to the other type of ruler because the markings are a little bit clearer on here. I know that this intersection right here where these cross, it's very important that we maintain that as the center of our subunit. If we take a little bit off, too much off of one side than the other side, then that intersection is not going to be in the very center of our patch, and we want to make sure that it is. I also know with a little bit of math that if my squared up subunit is 3 inches, this center is going to be at 1.5 inches in from each of the sides. So I'm going to take my ruler, here's my 1.5 inch line right here where the 2 come together. I'm going to place that point right there in the very center where these seam lines intersect. So placing 1.5 inches right there in the very middle. Again, I'm lining up my diagonals, and as I look at this, it's really out of square. On this side right here, it's almost at 3 inches. It sticks out here, and as I follow my 3-inch marking around here, it's I have quite a bit that I can trim off there. I did oversize this when I put it together, and by oversizing just a little bit, it gives you that extra leeway, that little fudge factor you might say, for being able to trim off the extra. So just again, my 1.5 inch intersection right here is in the very center where those seams intersect in the center of this subunit. I am concerned about my diagonal line being on the seam line. That's the most important thing. And I'm going to trim off 2 sides. I'm going to rotate this 180 degrees so that the cut side is facing me now and the uncut side is away from me. Again, I'm going to take my 1.5 inch intersection here, put it on the very center intersection of the subunit, and also now lining up my 3-inch line here and here on the cut sides, making sure that my diagonal is along this diagonal seam, and I will trim the other 2 sides away. And there we have a quarter square triangle subunit. And here are the 2 together, trimmed to the same 3-inch measurement. Finally, taking this one step further, after you've assembled your subunits into your block, it's important to again square up your block. Some directions will tell you to do this. If they don't, square it up anyway, because you'll have much better results with your quilt overall if you square up your subunits as you go along and your blocks as you go along before you begin constructing your construction on your quilt top. The tool that I'm using for this is Quilter's Rules Square Block Lap Board, which comes in different sizes. There are others of this type on the market, other brands. This block I have already squared up. I just want to show you that This is meant to square up. You can square up any size block, but the maximum would be 12-inch finished or 12.5-inch unfinished. On two sides I have an extra 1/2 inch for squaring up purposes. Lay this on my block just like this and double check that I do have this squared to 12.5 inches all the way around. I have trimmed off the little dog ears when I did that. And here is a second block which has not been trimmed. As you notice, the dog ears are still here from making my subunits and putting the block together. This block has a little bit of an issue with construction as it's not laying totally flat, so I have to stretch it out just a little bit there to make sure that I have my 12.5 inches all the way around. Laying this on here, if I needed to make any adjustments, I would do that. One of the things that's very important in squaring up when you're working with triangles that come to a point, you want to maintain 1/4 inch between the point and the edge of your block, because that will be part of your seam allowance when you put your blocks together. So I don't want to trim that off unless I absolutely have to and there's no other way for doing it. So laying this on here, I'm going to be able to trim off the dog ears and these two sides. And if there's any threads or anything sticking out, you can do that too. Turn it 180 degrees so that now the cut edge is on my left side and facing me. And putting my lat board for trimming back on. Lining it up with my edges. So when you come out with your block ending up just about perfect for what it should be, that means you've done things right. Trimming off the dog ears across here and across here. It's important to do the little things right. When you do the little things right, you end up with blocks that are just about perfect with very little trimming, so that when you go ahead and put your quilt together, it will end up square.